So now, I think you know her well already.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Dan and Anat. Dr. Anat Greenstein from our center will be talking about an ideal world full of freaks and unusual women, potential space, collective imagining, and social research in the here and now. Oh. Okay, hi. So my presentation today is going to be based on sorry, yeah, okay. So is it okay if I stay here?
Yes, yes.
Great. So my presentation today is going to be based on my PhD research, which was done long ago. But I hope it would still be interesting and relevant, and particularly on one subset of my research, which was a project to design the ideal, the best school in the world. And the title is a quote from one of the participants in that research. So in terms of the structures of the presentation, I will start with a theoretical background, discussing issues of time and orientations in time when dealing with research geared towards social change. And then I'm going to discuss the specific context of the research, and within that, this section of the methodology, using it as a case study to examine the ways time and utopian future thinking plays a role within research, and then I will give some conclusions. So the first part, time and research oriented towards social change, and first of all, I want to say it's probably pretty obvious to every person in this room, but it's often worth repeating even the obvious things. That disability research is political research, and that when we research against the backdrop of oppression, more specifically against the backdrop of ableism in this case, unless we actively look for ways to use our research in the interest of liberation, we run a very real risk of being part of oppression. And this issue is really one of the earliest issues discussed within disability studies. And Mike Oliver, in 1992, in a special issue of Disability and Society dedicated to emancipatory research, coined these three aspects of what counts as emancipatory research, which are gain, reciprocity, and empowerment. So, having said that, let me talk about the ways we can orient in time when we are dealing with social change. So the first orientation in time is about researching the current reality, trying to describe problems, oppressions, barriers within this current reality, so that we can explore the root causes of these oppressions and hopefully later on inform policy, practice, whatever needs be in order to remove these barriers. So sort of looking at the present in order to change the future. And I'm not going to be talking about this orientation at all during my presentation. But I will be talking about the other two orientations. So number 2, co-creating future visions to inform our analysis and practice. So trying to look at what we want the future to be like as a form of research, and maybe yes or no, then informing policy, practice, etc., to understand how we should arrive at that future. And the third form of orienting ourselves within research is about the simultaneous action and analysis. So trying to create the change within the research itself and analyzing this form of change. So the co-creating future visions, and Halpin 2003 talks about the importance of using utopian thought experiments which question how would social reality look like if we configured it in radically different and improved terms and from different positions than the normally adopted. And these forms of utopian thought experiments, I decided now I'll completely give up on reading because I can't do it. So, sorry. My eyes are not working very well at the moment. The importance of engaging with these utopian thought experiments is precisely because of their distance from the current reality. They help us relativize the present. That is, to understand that the way things are is not the only way possible, and that things could be otherwise. And this distance from the present helps us to discuss things that are unhindered by our common sense assumptions, and allow us to look at ideas that would otherwise be dismissed outright as impossible or irrelevant. Discussing these utopian thought experiments together allows us to create thick and rich descriptions of the way things could be. And therefore it can enable us to both imagine and anticipate radical alternatives to the status quo. I highlighted these words, imagine and anticipate, because I think these are two different ways that we can work. The way we act in the present is not limited to the present, but it also, the current moment always bears the seeds of the moments to come later. And therefore, if we try within our actions to anticipate this future, it might be more likely that this future will come about. And the second form, or rather I said it was the third, but it's the second form of orienting towards time that I discuss here, is about what I call prefigurative action research. And the term prefigurative praxis comes from activists, particularly from anarchist writings about activism. And it discusses how we can create in the here and now, in the current world, these desired relations that we want to be in the world as it will change. So it's not about looking at this future world as something, as some place that we will somehow dramatically and suddenly arrive at, but it's about building the new world within the shell of the old one, starting to create these very relations and structures that we want to see. And with relation to research, it's about changing the social condition within the sphere of the research itself. And Davis, not Leonard Davis, John Davis, 2000, speaks about when he looks at these criteria used by Oliver around gain, reciprocity, and empowerment. He says the first sphere of influence. I think I should have a slide. No, but I don't. So, sorry. So, Davis says that the first sphere of influence that is open to the researcher to create this sort of gain and empowerment and reciprocity is the sphere of the research itself. And by using non-authoritarian, it speaks about the importance of using non-authoritarian methods, particularly within disability research, and particularly within disability research within the context of institutions. And I take it to apply to schools, which is the context of my research, that are highly authoritarian environments. we create this change and we may create these different relations that also allows people, both the disabled people and staff members, to experience different kind of relations within the research. Okay, so the context of the wider research, as I told you, it was part of my PhD research, and the PhD was called Radical Inclusive Education, and was trying to connect critiques of education, particularly from the standpoint of democratic education and Freire's ideas around education, with critiques of special education coming from the disability studies movement, from the disability right movement, and from inclusive education movements, and create these critiques to ask what would education look like if we started from the perspective of human diversity. So I wasn't asking how can current educational provision be changed in order to better fit the needs of disabled students, but rather asking how can we imagine education when we start from the standpoint of human diversity. And there were a lot of different parts to the research, but one part of the research had to do with conducting ethnographic research in a secondary school in a highly deprived area in the north of England. You can see the picture here that kind of really, I think, captures the feel of the north of England and Manchester. I really love this. So, rain, yeah. This is, by the way, a picture that was taken in August. Love it. I absolutely love it. Have it hanging on my wall in the living room. And sorry, attachment to place. Yeah, it's just on the wall overlooking the Haifa Bay. And so this school was delivering outstanding education as judged by the Ofsted, זה הפיקוח על הבתי ספר. And it had a separate special educational needs unit within the larger school, and this unit had 70 pupils in it, ages 12 to 15. So I was conducting ethnographic research there, so I was using observations and I was doing interviews with staff, and that was all happening in 2011. So as I told you, it's quite a while ago, and these methods, the observations and the interviews, posed some challenges to interacting with the young people within the unit, because the school norms were not really allowing for, or rather they were restricting the forms of adult-child relationship enabled within the school. So the way adults and young people use space within the school is quite different. When I was conducting observations during lessons, during classes, if I was taking the standpoint of a pupil, I was supposed to be sitting quietly at the back. The orientation of the gaze is always towards the teacher. I was only seeing like the backs of the students. Speaking to the student sitting next to me was kind of foully looked upon because it was considered a disruption to what's going on in the class. So I tried in some lessons to take a more active role, walking around to distribute materials during art and class or answer questions, but that was also a very sort of specific adult behavior. And that was also true during the breaks. So while the students and the staff shared the space of the yard, the two groups kind of kept to themselves. The adults were sitting with the adults, the young people were playing with the young people. Going too close to the young people as an adult within the school felt to be intrusive to them. Young people who came and spent too much time with the adults were later talked about in the staff room as being needy, as being socially inappropriate, etc. And also the modes of communication between adults and young people in the school often fall under what is defined as an IRF model of communication, initiation, response, feedback. So an adult would initiate communication with a young person, usually by asking a question. The young person would respond, and then the adult would give feedback, usually in the form of saying whether or not this response was right and wrong, asking for clarification, etc., which is very, very similar to the way interviews would work in research. And as I wanted to create a space in interviews for young people to express themselves, it seemed that under these sort of modes of communication, that would be a real problem. So there was a big challenge of how can I interact with young people in ways that subvert these adult-child hierarchies that mire the relationships in the school, and how can I support them to make abstract discussions more accessible? So sort of asking this question of how would social reality look like if we configured it completely differently as a highly abstract discussion. And so the way I chose to go about it is by using this play and fantasy and collective utopian thought experiment. I ran 5 workshops with a group of 5 young people, aged 13 to 15. And the aim of this workshop was to provide enough space for students to explore their own vision of education, while also providing them enough support for the discussion of complex and abstract issues through the means of multiple methods, group work, play, and fantasy. What actually happened in these workshops? So the first workshop, I used a board game. I had 2 dice. One die had the nouns on it, so it had things like places in the school, subjects that you learn in the school, activities, etc. And the other one had adjectives on it, so it had things like fun, boring, fair, fair or unfair, etc. And each student in turn would throw both dice, and then they would have, so for example, a student who came up with unfair places answered, you'd like this, Ilan? He answered, it's the library. Because they shush you all the time, and even if you just sneeze, they tell you to be quiet. And so I use this activity to understand students' perspectives on school the way it is now, and used it to inform the way I designed the rest of the workshops. And in particular, what came out of this game was that students really valued activities that were fun and that were using drama and music. So in the second session, we used arts and crafts to draw models of what the best teacher, the best friend, and the best student in the world would look like. We had big sheets of paper, students lay on them, and we used like a felt tip pen to draw the outlines of their bodies, and then collectively decorated. I will go into this in more detail in a second. And the third workshop was about rules in the school. So I gave students cards with a lot of different rules that they had to then sort into 3 piles, rules that we should have in the best school in the world, rules that should never ever be in the best school in the world, and rules that they don't care about. And while making up these rules, I used 3 categories of rules. So I used some rules that reflected the current rules in the school. So for example, you have to come to school wearing a uniform of a suit and tie. And for those of you who are not British, this is actually what they wear in schools in the UK. And the second category was rules that are the opposite of this current reality. So for example, you can wear whatever you want to school. And the last kind of category that I used was other rules that were basically designed to introduce this kind of sense of fun and playfulness. So for example, here it was you have to come to school naked, or you can only eat yellow food in school, or stuff to kind of encourage students to just play around. Lo, dai. There was another one that was with using drama, the fourth session, so where we used drama to create scenes from the best school in the world and School from Hell. Students really liked that one. And then we used some like cardboard and materials to build a model of what a school would look like. And I was really interested, but I won't tell you anything about that. So the role of play and fantasy, and Winnicott referred to the space of play as a third space that is occurring between the inner and outer reality. So it's not just something play, it's not just something that I imagine on my own, but it happens in a social context with other people. It has rules, but these rules are different from the rules of the social reality as it usually is. And more importantly, these rules are being made up as we go along and can be negotiated and easily changed. So we can think about play as social reality in the making. And play and fantasy also invites us to use varied ideas rather than call for right and wrong answers. So it's actually one of the few spaces in adult-child interactions that kind of naturally brings us towards this place of no right and wrong answers. So an example of how this play and fantasy was used to explore the social rules that currently work in our school. So I invited the children to discuss use the arts and crafts material to create a model of the best teacher in the world. And one of the students suggested that they wanted, one of the students wanted the teacher to be brilliant and beautiful and have blonde hair and blue eyes. And another student said he wanted the teacher to have green hair. And I asked, why should a teacher have green hair? And that student answered, I want her to look like a freak. So Jeff, who was the student who wanted the teacher to be brilliant and beautiful, said, no, she said, we need to make a brilliant, beautiful teacher, not a freak. And Jeff said, no, she didn't say beautiful. So he was here interpreting. We see here this different interpretation of what is the meaning of the word best. What would the best teacher in the world be like? So I asked, what does it mean if your teacher is a freak? And Jack said, she's a little bit different. And I asked if it might be good to have a teacher that's a little bit different. And Jeff, the student who wanted the teacher to be brilliant and beautiful, replied by saying, yeah, probably, a bit more pizzazz. So we can see here how this pizzazz, so Neely suggested, pizzazz is like this sort of energy, high energy, quite glamorous thing. Neely suggested we should translate it, patzatz. Ptzatza. So, no, but you said that I was an exemplifier. I remember that I thought I have to tell you that I didn't actually. At the time of the research, my hair was black, so that's not the reason that I wanted the teacher to have green hair. If anyone had any suspicions. So what we saw there is how that the students use this kind of fantastic goal to negotiate and reinterpret issues around norms, beauty, freakishness, difference, I don't have the time to talk to you about the discussion about whether or not we want the teacher to be transgender, but it was really interesting discussion. And in conclusion, we can see how collective play, fantasy, and utopian imagining can provide a different standpoint from which to explore the here and now. So this distance from actual lived reality allows us to negotiate and look at the rules in ways that enable different stories to be told side by side with without one necessarily having to vanquish the other. But if we go back to Oliver's insistence on disability research providing the participants with reciprocity gain and empowerment, we need to ask, did it bring about any real change, any real gain in participants' actual life? And I would argue here that, that supporting critical investigation is a real gain in people's life, even if it doesn't change policy, even if it doesn't change the educational provision. It changes the way people can interact with the reality around them and explore it, and explore their relationships with themselves and the world. And I would also argue, and kind of leading to Tamar's presentation very soon, that if we want to increase autonomy and we adopt a relational understanding of autonomy, McKenzie 2000 says that the ability to imagine otherwise, the ability to imagine oneself in a different way than things currently are, is a key part of this form of autonomy, and that we need to create the relations that enable people to imagine themselves individually and culturally in a different place. And that's it.
So I think we can agree it was Batzatz, right? Thank you.
If you want more information...
if you want to buy the book.
No, you don't have to buy the book. You can download it from my Academia Edu or from ResearchGate, or write to me and I will send you a free PDF, unless you work in an institution, in which case buy the book.
If you want more aspects of your PhD, we had you talk in one of our conferences a few years ago, and it's on our YouTube channel. Yeah. So that's, I don't remember when that was, but it's there.
2019?
Something like that.
The problem is that the YouTube file is like 4.5 hours, so good luck with that.
Watch it all. 2 questions. I knew I could trust you, Nelly.
First of all, I really enjoy the presentation and the intention to use research as a platform to think differently, imagine new futures, and seeing disabled students as a participant of this discussion. We usually think in theory that the child is the image of the future, and it seems that in your research they were the subject of creating and imagining that future. And I thought about, I don't remember his name, Nira, אולי תעזרי לי, about queer futurity. איך? מונוז. כן, אסטבן מונוז, בדיוק. He talks about the concept of queer. איך?
Queer futurities.
כן, queer futurities, עתיד queery, עתידים queering. He thought about the concept of queer as something that is on the horizon, something that is not in the here and now, but is all the time referring to a radical, potential futures, that we are only seeing hints of it in our current time. And I thought that creep, in a lot of sense, and Nira and I thought about it, how creep is also walking in a similar direction, because it's trying to imagine those possibility, radical, anarchistic possibilities, and pointing through language, maybe a metaphor even, of giving a language to it. And queer and creep maybe is doing that, is like offering an option. So
thanks, Nili. I'm not sure if there was a question there, but I totally agree with this notion of a future as something that we can kind of see glimpses of, and I think what I was trying to do in this research, yes, to give language, but also to give a much more embodied and lived experience. So not just language to talk about these things, but also bringing a lot of other aspects of experience into this imagined future and the way that we can work with and through it. And it was really interesting during the research project and during the different sessions to see how different aspects of experience came to be. So, for example, in this session that I described here, where we were drawing outlines of students' bodies, it really raised a lot of questions around sexuality, around beauty, around sort of these external features of the body. But then later, when we had the session that used more drama, for example, so there were much more discussion of other sort of traits. So one girl said she wanted to be the emo girl. There was emo, זה כאילו כזאת רגשנית, גותית כזאת. אימו. א' מ' ו'. י' גם את אומרת? יאללה, לכי על י'. I'm challenging the translators. And then there was this other kid who said, well, I want to be the crazy record dude. And so there was a lot more, there was focus on different activities around dance and where that can happen within the school. So there were these kind of really different aspects of the experience that were coming to life. And that was actually also a big challenge with the transcription later. And I didn't talk about that at all, but I was using comic strips. Never mind. So I at some point I started using I did videos of the theater plays, and then I converted them into comic strips, because that sort of enabled a lot of these aspects of movement and music to come into play, which didn't come when I was kind of trying to just transcribe the words that were said.
Thank you very much. Thank you.